Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Today's episode is based around one simple question. Take a look at your game room, your bedroom, your closet, wherever you store your games, wherever you display your games, and take a look around your individual collections. Take a look at your Genesis collection, your Nintendo, Super Nintendo, PS1, PS2, what have you, and just ask yourself, what collection is the weakest here? Which collection do I need to really concentrate on, or what collection needs the most improvement? For me, without a doubt, unfortunately, is the Super Nintendo. And I say unfortunately because of a couple of things. Number one, this console has become extremely expensive to collect for CIB. And I realize that not everybody is after, CIB games. Myself, I just have to roll that way. I'm not against, or nor do I look down upon anyone that doesn't collect CIB, but that's just not the way I'm wired. So for me, it's going to be an expensive endeavor. And number two, because this is a console where the games came in cardboard boxes, man, and we all know that Genesis games are much easier to maintain over the years due to the card clamshell covers. Where the Super Nintendo, the cardboard boxes, man, they don't stand the test of time, especially if they weren't stored in a proper place or well cared for. And it seems that my parents must have either lost or thrown out most of the boxes from when I was a kid with Super Nintendo. And it's not like when you're a kid you're thinking to yourself, oh man, I gotta keep these pristine because later on they're gonna be worth a fortune, or I've got to keep this mint or CIB or not lose anything. You're just not thinking like that. And it's also one of those things where you just don't think like, oh god, I'm so nostalgic for this game. The only thing you're thinking of is, oh god, a new system's coming out. Let's round up this old Super Nintendo and all these games I'm done playing, and let's trade them in and get that new console. You're not thinking in like a nostalgic purpose or point of view. So let's go ahead and take a look at my very small, but I guess somewhat respectable Super Nintendo collection. There's definitely a lot of games that I owned as a kid that I don't have again, and I've got a big stack of games here that are loose, and it just kind of drives me crazy. So let's go ahead and get started, and as always guys, thank you for watching, and please share with me down below, what is the one console that you own a library for that needs the most improvement? Thanks for watching. Alright guys, so we'll start things off with the loose carts that I have for the Super Nintendo. And as I look down at this very small collection here, some of it seems criminal to me that I don't have the boxing manual, and I am looking to fix that situation in the near future. And I don't mean to talk like this to look down upon anyone that does cart-only collecting. If that's your thing, that's fine. Like I said earlier, it just doesn't work for me. I've got to have stuff complete, just for me. Not saying anything is the wrong way to do things, but really quickly, Lost Vikings, one of my early favorites on the Super Nintendo. Loved playing this multiplayer, solving puzzles together. A fantastic game. Mystical Ninja is one that I got very early on as well. I absolutely loved this game. The side-scrolling mixed with like kind of side-scrolling like a top-down view, and then the side-scrolling stages. A great combination. Upgrades. Really cool. Very Japanesey, but very enjoyable. Super Punch-Out was a great game on the Nintendo, the original Punch-Out. And this was a great upgrade. The sprites were huge. It blew me away at the time. Super Double Dragon, one of my favorite beat-em-ups, man. I know people give this shit for, they say it's too slow and it runs too slow, but I absolutely love the detailed and really deep combat system for this as a brawler back then. Great beat-em-up action. Stunt Race Effects was a really impressive game for back then. Starfox and Stunt Race both really impressed me with the FX chip. Early polygons, looking great. Next is Indiana Jones. This is a really cool game too. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the movie, so I was really excited to get this as a kid and play it. Super Mario All-Stars and Super Mario World, as I mentioned earlier, kind of criminal not to have this complete. Collection, 16-bit updated graphics, great stuff. And Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. I absolutely loved Spider-Man and Carnage, especially, and Venom as a kid. This is a great, one of the better beat-em-ups starring Spider-Man from back in the day. Cybernator was a game that totally came out of left field. Really impressed me with its graphics and mechs and shooting action. A lot of stuff going on the screen at once. Turtles 4, once again, criminal not to have, one of my favorite beat-em-ups. I don't have it complete. Death and Return of Superman was really special for me personally because I enjoyed the comic book line so very much. I loved the 4 new Superman that emerged. Being able to play them here is really cool. Another criminal, no excuse not to have this one complete, Super Metroid. One of my favorite games, an early classic. Same with Zelda, A Link to the Past. Sparkster, this is an excellent follow-up to the Rocket Knight Adventures on Genesis. And actually, I like this one over the Genesis version of Sparkster. There was 2 games made, and this one is just fantastic on the Super Nintendo. Great game from Konami. Plock is another game that I didn't really have growing up, and I got this through word of mouth on YouTube. Everybody kept praising Plock, and I had to see what it was all about. Now I just need to get the box. Moving on to my boxed and complete Super Nintendo games, very much like my cart-only pile, I don't have an incredible amount of Super Nintendo games, but what I do have is very close to me personally. A lot of these games really represent my childhood and being pulled away from the Genesis for a while and really falling in love with the Super Nintendo. The first game, ActRaiser, probably one of my favorite Super Nintendo games, 16-bit games in general. This game completely blew me away and was the sole reason I wanted the Super Nintendo early on. Some of the most amazing music I've ever heard. Yuzo Koshiro at his finest right here. A side-scrolling game mixing like sim godlike elements, and I had never experienced a game like that where you're kind of rebuilding this ravaged city, sealing away demons, listening to citizens' requests. Just completely amazing. I was really excited for the sequel, and it lived up and disappointed at the same time. It lived up to the side-scrolling action stages, were no doubt the strongest part of ActRaiser 1, but when you take away the like sim world rebuilding elements from the first one, it kind of lessens the impact, man. It had amazing side-scrolling stages, beautiful graphics, music was great again, but it was just missing the elements that I really enjoyed from the first one, those town rebuilding elements. It really lost a lot on the second game by losing those elements. Soul Blazer is amazing in the way that the original ActRaiser was. I had never played anything like this, man. It was kind of like a top-down Zelda-ish kind of game, but you're also going into these alternate worlds via little items in this game and rebuilding towns and watching towns kind of restore themselves and making things reappear back in the real world. An amazing top-down action RPG. Soul Blazer is one of my favorites. And Illusion of Gaia is my game that I probably like the least of these. Maybe ActRaiser and Illusion of Gaia are tied, but it's still a fantastic game. Very high quality, great graphics, a really good storyline. I enjoy these games immensely, and if you have any one of these games, you haven't done a bad thing because they're all fantastic. Next up we have a really underrated couple of games here. These are the Turrican games, Super Turrican and Super Turrican 2. I think these should be mentioned in the same sentence of games like Contra and Gunstar Heroes. These are some fantastic run-and-gun shooters that have kind of been forgotten a little bit over the time. Spot on controls, music, very impressive effects going on in the second one. I'm very happy to own this series because this game has unfortunately gotten crazy expensive for a complete copy. I would never go out and spend the money that this goes for now, today, to get this game, but I'm happy I have it. I will not deny that. So fantastic run-and-gun games on the Super Nintendo. The Turrican series are must-owns. Next up is Shadowrun, another one of my favorite games of all time, and one of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo. This game just completely blew me away as a kid. This futuristic science fiction, kind of gritty, three-quarter view top-down, kind of has like point-and-click elements in this. You're kind of like aiming around and shooting, but also solving puzzles and interacting with characters. Great dialogue, a fantastically atmospheric game. Next up, we've got, man, some of my favorite games on the console as well. Konami was one of those companies. You know, you hear a lot of people talking shit about Konami now and all the horrible decisions they've made and how they've fallen from grace. Well, the main reason why that is talked about is because back then this company was just so damn good. And that is evidenced by the stack of games here in front of you. I'm completely enamored with their work back in the 16-bit days, and I am very happy to have each one of these titles here. Super Castlevania 4 completely reinvented the series. Extremely impressive music, graphics, level design, level progression. Expert game, expertly done. Same with Contra 3, The Alien Wars, another update to a Super Nintendo series. Completely took you into the 16-bit generation, showed you why you had to upgrade. Run and gun action done right, mode 7 through the roof. Konami Sunset Riders was a port of the arcade game. I thought it was very impressive here on the Super Nintendo. Obviously it didn't match the arcade one for one, but it was a fun game and it was very fun to play as two-player. Axelay was a shooter that completely blew me away at the time. I remember seeing the reviews of this game getting like 9s and damn near perfect scores, and I can see why, because it's just a shooter done right on the Super Nintendo, mixing Cyto 3D effects with side-scrolling stages, a top-quality shoot-'em-up from Konami, one of my favorites here. Zombies Ate My Neighbors is an excellent example of Konami at the top of their game. Two-player action done to perfection. A real horror feel, but kind of campy and funny at the same time. Great two-player action. Rock and Roll Racing is one of my favorite games from the 16-bit generation. This stands up there with like Road Rash 1 and 2 for me as like the pinnacle of racing games. It's interesting, RPM Racing was a game that I got for the Super Nintendo around launch, And RPM Racing is the prequel to this, and this just improves on it in every way. RPM Racing was really slow. It forced split screen even if you were playing single player for whatever reason. But this game controls perfectly, whipping around the corners, upgrading your car, getting better shocks and better tires and more firepower. An amazing carnage-filled racer on the Super Nintendo with great music. Next up we have Super Ghouls and Ghosts from Capcom. This might not be the best home port of the game, but I enjoy the Ghouls and Ghosts games, their atmosphere, the gameplay, the difficulty. A good game on the Super Nintendo for sure. Run Saber is a very interesting game on the Super Nintendo. This is Atlas. They made a great game that is very much like Strider, but this one's two-player. Not quite as good as Strider in my opinion, but a pretty close second. It's a lot of fun to play and the co-op works well. Starfox is an amazing example of the early Super Nintendo's power with the FX chip installed. Great early polygon shooting action, a long-running series that is still going today with the new entry, just came out recently on the Wii U. This has got great memories attached to it for me personally. I had a lot of fun playing this, and it was very powerful back then, very impressive. Aero the Acrobat 1 and 2, and a few videos back I did a Forgotten Platformers episode, and I spoke fondly of Aero, and I still do. Nothing has changed. He is one of my favorite mascots from the whole 16-bit craze of mascots. I think he has held up and survived the test of time. I still think he's a cool character. I think his games are fantastic. The second one is my personal favorite, but these are great mascot platformers done right. Check them out if you're able to, because I think they hold up well. Breath of Fire 1 and 2 is an RPG series I recently talked about in my last video. My views haven't changed since then, obviously. Great RPGs on the Super Nintendo, very traditional. Capcom, art style, fantastic. Music, fantastic. If you are into old school traditional RPGs, take a look at Breath of Fire 1 and 2, you can't go wrong. Next up is FZero and SimCity, and I put these next to each other because I received FZero on launch and SimCity close after that. And FZero is basically a showpiece, man. This made the Super Nintendo seem so revolutionary at the time. This Mode 7, this new style of gameplay I'd never seen before. Scaling, rotation, racing around on futuristic hovercrafts on these 3D worlds was just insane. It's still a lot of fun to this day, as a matter of fact, and I wish that the series would continue on in some form. SimCity kind of introduced me to a whole new style or genre of game. I just became completely addicted with creating new cities and maintaining them, watching them grow, placing residential and commercial zones, and building them up, and watching citizens move into my town. I couldn't get enough of it. I played it over and over again. And it's still a lot of fun to this day, man. This is what got me hooked on that style of game to this day, SimCity. Thanks a lot. Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3. Man, what can I say about these that hasn't already been said? It's one of those type of things where this was cutting edge technology back then in 94, 95 on the Super Nintendo. And this was a big reason that a lot of people didn't decide to jump on the PlayStation and next generation consoles, because the Super Nintendo was cranking out games that looked this good and continuing to reinvent itself, man. These were unthinkable when the system first came out, how good these looked. They were I believe the tagline was developed on CGI workstations and top-end computers. These games just made side-scrollers cool again. Next up, moving on to a trio of shooters. UN Squadron was an early game that I completely fell in love with on the Super Nintendo. Now, I hadn't read any of the comics or anything like that, but I fell in love with the game as is, and I thought it was a great early game on the Super Nintendo. Upgrading my weapons and the shoot-'em-up action was just fantastic. Phalanx is something I just picked up recently, and I haven't had too much of a chance to try it out. I know it's a pretty decent shoot-'em-up, and you evidenced by the price tag that is on the game. Normally you would never catch me with a price sticker on my games. It drives me crazy. Once again, it's that OCD thing. But I will get that sticker off, and I'm looking forward to playing more of that. I remember the cover standing out to me. I remember seeing this as a kid, and the price tag unfortunately is covering up this guy's face, but some of the oddest box art design and choice for a futuristic shoot-'em-up set in outer space with a old man with a big grizzly beard playing a banjo. It doesn't make any sense. Biometal is a fantastic shooter with an awesome techno soundtrack, man. Great game. Killer Instinct, another very impressive game at the time for the Super Nintendo. I remember this being hyped up as coming out on the then Ultra 64, but they still released it for Super Nintendo, and it turned out pretty well. Pretty impressive for the time, I must say. I like Killer Instinct quite a bit. I think it's a really underrated fighter, and I'm glad it came back on the Xbox One. Secret of Evermore is one of the games that I never played as a kid, and I've never played it, period. I found this locally at the flea market, and it was a great price. so I picked it up. I know it's got a reputation as being kind of a love it or hate it style of game, and I'm looking forward to trying out and seeing which camp I fall into. Uni Racers uses a graphical style very similar to Donkey Kong Country, and it's got that 90s kind of CGI workstation feel to it. A really cool racing game. The backgrounds are a little bland, but I thought it was really cool and charming racing as these little uni racers and watching the seat kind of turn its head and look at you and doing cool stunts. A really cool racing game. Here we have all three of the Star Wars games from JVC. These guys did a great job on these Star Wars 16-bit games, and they did a fantastic job on the Indiana Jones game as well. Really faithful to the movies in terms of like capturing that vibe and the music, and frustratingly difficult. Some cool Mode 7 effects in these games. Really good Star Wars games. Mario Paint, man. And you know what's funny about this game is I bought this for a very expensive price back in the day and had a ton of fun. I created my own animations and just doing coloring stuff, doodling around. The same kind of stuff that you can get for like 99 cents on an app on your phone these days, which just shows you how far technology like this has come. But this was a lot of fun messing around with back in the day, and I think it's cool to have this and just go back and kind of revisit the stuff I used to do on it playing as a kid. And my final boxed game on the Super Nintendo is none other than Jim Lee's Wildcats. And I was such a big fan of Image Comics back in the day, kind of all the top artists from Marvel quitting and forming their own company and having comics that never came out on time, but Wildcats was an awesome series. And I was really excited when this game came out. Really top-notch production value on this. The graphics look great. I had a lot of fun playing as my favorite characters from the comics. An average beat 'em up, but it's cool that a Wildcats game even exists, so I'm really happy to have this. Alright guys, so that wraps up my Super Nintendo collection. Not the biggest collection by any means. There's people on here that have just amazing Super Nintendo collections, and I'm instantly jealous. And I am happy though that my Super Nintendo is in still great shape, and it hasn't turned that kind of disgusting cigarette ashtray stained color that I've seen a lot of systems unfortunately go down that path and just not look good. Not that the system is a real looker anyway. I always preferred the Super Famicom, but it's still a great system, and the Super Nintendo is my collection that I vote that I would like to significantly improve as time marches on, which might not be an easy thing due to the aforementioned crazy price hike, and especially Super Nintendo games, man. They're getting so expensive. But in my dreams, I will one day finish off my Super Nintendo collection and do it justice the way I want. I want to hear from you guys, as always. Tell me, what is your collection that needs the most improvement? Thank you guys for watching. As always, Games of War is absolutely nothing without you.